if you're early on, you're trying to find the initial design partners, right? Figure out who your target customer profile is. You probably don't want to overly invest in ABX work because you don't actually know who your ideal customer profile is. And it all starts with that kind of target list of accounts. If you don't know the right target list of accounts, then you're just really like doing coordinated, unified go-to-market in a way that's wasted effort because it's to the wrong group of people and you kind of need to start from scratch.
And we are so excited. Well, I'm personally excited, Kyle, for this. I feel like we had you on the podcast maybe over a year ago. And now there's just so much more to even talk about and just super, super pumped to have you here. So I'll give a quick introduction to you and I'll embarrass you with all of your amazing accomplishments. And then we'll go into more of a dialogue. And for those of you that this might be your first live podcast, this is an opportunity for you to connect with leaders in our go-to-market community and ask them any of your questions as you're growing your startups or businesses. So we are very excited to have Kyle here. Kyle has a newsletter called Growth Unhinged. If you're not subscribed, you are missing out. Right now, he shares it with over 50,000 readers and talks about all things go-to-market. It's something I read every single week. Before this, he was an operating partner at OpenView for 8 years, where he specialized in monetization, product-led growth, SaaS metrics, and lots of interesting background before that in marketing and strategy consulting. And we're very fortunate to have Kyle here to talk about all things ABM, growing a newsletter, and everything in between. So Kyle, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, excited to be on the live podcast. Excited to 10x our go-to-market together.
Let's do it. And Kyle, maybe starting out, what did I miss from your background? Quick background from you, from your words.
Well, I guess so maybe even just helping folks get to know me a little bit better. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So I was, born a son of immigrants, growing up in Ohio, rural Ohio. He went and served in World War II, and then he actually took what he earned from World War II, gambled it on the boat back, and was able to earn enough to open his own tire business. And then he ultimately opened a car and tire business, had 10 kids. All of them lived upstairs above the car lot. And then, all of his sons actually started their own businesses as well, including my dad. So I've been kind of surrounded by entrepreneurs my whole life. The closest I've probably gotten into it is my lemonade stand. But my passion's really working with builders who have really great products or business ideas and helping them get off the ground and turn those into kind of profitable businesses. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 15 plus years here, both at Simon Kucher and then at OpenView, where I had the privilege of having kind of a front row seat of the journeys of amazing companies like User Testing, Expensify, and so on.
That is awesome. That is a great story, Kyle. And you're not giving yourself credit. I would say Growth Unhinged newsletter is extremely entrepreneurial. So that can be take two from the lemonade stand. That's your part two of entrepreneurship. Well, I'd love to start there. So you started this newsletter March 2021. What was the experience building and growing it over the last 3 years?
It's been a huge learning. It's kind of my way to practice what I preach. It's around growth and marketing. So backstory is that in 2020, it's probably a lot of folks, I wasn't able to meet people in real life, wasn't able to go to events. And so I started writing a lot more on LinkedIn, just kind of sharing my ideas there, and found that I was ultimately able to find a community of people that believe similar things, had similar ideas, or just loved to debate ideas. So posted a lot on LinkedIn and then was getting kind of that itch to both have more of an owned community rather than being at the whim of the algorithm and go deeper on the topics that I was passionate about versus having that character of it. I'm long-winded for folks who don't know. And so started, deciding to write a newsletter March 2021. I would say probably at the peak newsletter hysteria time. I think every VC in 2021 started a newsletter on Substack, but it was ultimately something I'm really glad I made the decision to do. It's been a lot of work. I now publish weekly, try to put a lot of thought and effort into everything I publish rather than spamming folks, but really glad I did it.
Is this what you expected to happen 3 years later?
So no, it's been up and down. So to give folks a sense of the kind of growth story, the first week that I shared that I was doing it, because I had this audience built up, I was able to get over 1,000 subscribers. I think about 1,000 the first day, like 2,000 the first week. I was like, I am a celebrity, right? I was patting myself on the back. And then it took a solid 18 months to go from that 2,000 mark to 10,000. And that was, with writing content that was kind of relatively high frequency, and I was putting a lot of work into that content. And so it was slow going. I mean, ultimately getting to 10,000 it was an accomplishment, but it felt relatively slow. Like I kept thinking, how do I move faster? But then fast forward, and 18 months later, it went from 10,000 to 50,000, and now at about 56,000. I think the big thing that I've learned is writing the newsletter has been more of a growth loop than something where it's like, you write and then you distribute the content. And ultimately there's a really kind of powerful community flywheel that has happened. And I kind of stumbled into it, but I write on LinkedIn, find what ideas are really resonating with the community. I often meet people through that, like get people kind of slide in my DMs or drop comments. I learned a lot about why I was maybe wrong, where I learned some great case studies and examples of folks doing the things that I'm talking about. And through that, I'm able to write much better content. And then I'm able to distribute the content because I'm writing things that I know people are passionate about with people that are also passionate about those topics.
I love the flywheel growth loop aspect. We think about that as well with our community and content. I'd be curious for you, did the strategy on how you do this change? So from 0 to 1,000, it sounds like, here's my newsletter, go for it. And then 1 to 10 was hard, and then 10 to 50, maybe a little easier. Did the strategy between each of those milestones change, or have you been pretty consistent over the last 3 years?
So been relatively consistent. I did increase the frequency at that 10,000 mark. So I went from bi-weekly to weekly. That certainly helped. And then I'd say like one thing that I learned is I was chasing big names initially, like essentially CEOs of unicorns. If I could interview them, that would maybe be something people would want to open and then read, right? And I was ultimately chasing sort of that idea of, it's all about getting really great people that my readers want to have access to. And then I realized over time, like the pieces that were doing the best were pieces that were either where I bring in a domain expert that's often not as well known, who goes extremely deep about a topic they care a lot about. So super deep, tactical. Those are the things that people seem to want to share or bookmark with other people. It's so really kind of specialized in niche topics where it's not the kind of thing that's like purposely trying to go viral or reach, like a super wide audience, not writing about topics like founder mode, but seem to provide a lot of value to a really specific group of people who then act based on, the content. So that's probably the biggest evolution is kind of rethinking how I even develop topics and work on them. But then I think the other thing is, and there is a balance to be struck between, initially, I think it started where everything was written by me, and then everything was sort of an interview or like kind of bringing in other people's perspectives. And what I found is that people actually crave the variety. They want to hear what I think about something and the perspective that I bring about something that I have a lot of experience with, but they also want to complement that with what other people think. And so I'm now probably writing like 1 in 3 or so of the pieces are kind of my own point of view, and then the rest are bringing in other people.
So going deeper into a specific topic on newsletters, I've seen your newsletters range from early on when I was subscribing, it was mostly PLG oriented. Now there's been content on how go-to-market teams need to shift from account-based marketing or ABM to ABX. And I thought this was super interesting. And sometimes I feel like you're reading my mind and you post something, I'm like, this is something I've been thinking about, but I haven't been able to articulate well. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. For folks that haven't read this piece, what is the shift? Why is it happening?
Well, let me even just do back about like connecting the dots there. I got into ABX through PLG, which is probably not the kind of thing that most people can say. But with product-led businesses, often they start kind of mass market. They start attracting a lot of users from, anyone that experiences the pain that their problem solves. And it's not like particularly intentional or focused. But then they start to layer on go-to-market teams to be more proactive with taking high-value accounts and, taking maybe self-serve accounts and turning them into enterprise logos. And when they do that, they're often looking at product signals as a signal of intent, but they need to overlay that firmographic signals to see, hey, who's actually in our ideal customer profile that we should be proactive with because they're going to be a great customer for us. And they're also often overlaying the fact that you probably don't have access to the right people at the account. You maybe have individual users and you need to get to the buyer. And so the product teams are trying to really drive the right engagement with those accounts so they become product qualified accounts. Sales is trying to work relationships and go bottom up or maybe cold outbound to the decision maker. Marketing is trying to provide air coverage to those accounts. And you actually start doing a number of sort of ABM tactics, but you're able to do them at scale because you have much better data on what those accounts care about, how they're using the product. So essentially, you're doing ABM, but with intent and in a unified fashion where it's not just owned by the marketing team, it's one channel. So that's always struck me as, hey, if we could design and go to market from scratch and we could sell to the precisely right person at the right account at the right time using data, that'd be pretty efficient, like pretty effective sales motion. So that's kind of the perspective I've had that's been in the back of my mind for the past number of years. But now as I think about kind of just applying to the broader software ecosystem, most businesses have been struggling to get pipeline, whether you're kind of PLG or SLG. You're also finding that your pipeline sources are more varied than they have been in the past year. So part of that's, trying to do a lot of things to see what moves the needle on pipeline. But more and more folks are mixing sort of PLG tactics with marketing, sales, and kind of BDR, SDR campaigns. They're leveraging AI technology to try to kind of automate maybe some of their outbound or run interesting plays. And so ops teams are getting involved. Like the number of things we're doing has really increased. And that increase in activities has really just started to become less and less focused, where it feels like it's harder to generate any pipeline. We're all busy and burnt out from doing a million things and trying to add additional stuff to the mix. One team celebrates success, hitting goals, but then ultimately sales never reaches out to that contact because they didn't think it was the right person at the right account. And so we're all busier than ever to generate less pipeline than we have in a way that feels like we're all getting burnt out at the same time. And so that's really the genesis of like what a lot of people have been feeling lately in the market. And we kind of bring together this ABX work that PLG companies have done, around target accounts with kind of taking this mindset and going, well, what if we just think about this as kind of a more modern set of go-to-market motions? So what if we said, hey, we actually know our exact ideal customer profile, and through tools like KeyPlay and others, Clay, we can figure out exactly how many companies those are and exactly who the right people are at those accounts. That can become our known universe of accounts. And then we can see where we are in the buying journey at those accounts. And it shouldn't really matter whether we got to that point in the buyer journey because of SDRs, because of AI, because of marketing activity, because of PLG. What just matters is that we find the right way to reach and influence those accounts that allows us to kind of ultimately get sales ready pipeline from great fit accounts and do so in a way that can scale and scale efficiently over time. So that's the genesis of writing about it. And then through doing that, I've kind of really refined a lot of my perspective by getting to meet other people super passionate about this topic.
This is great. This is when I said you read my mind sometimes before I can articulate it. This is the evolution we saw with our own customers, right? Where you go all in on PLG, people are obsessed with finding PQLs, and then there's MQLs, and there's all this data everywhere. But realistically, you need to have more of this account-based strategy of what are you going to do with this data to actually figure out how to reach out, how to engage, how to make this successful initiative. So
exactly. And even within for PLG companies, people realized that product usage data wasn't the only important signal, right? Like there's other signals of intent. Maybe you have a decision maker attending your webinar, right? Like that's a signal of intent. And if you were just focused on the product data, for example, you would totally lose sight of an important play.
Yep, exactly. And that's why we started investing in all intent signals besides just product usage. So it definitely makes sense. And I would be curious for you, should all companies do ABM or ABX? What companies should lean into this and which ones should not?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, so I guess I think that thought process applies really to the vast majority of B2B software companies, but I would zoom out and I'd say if you're early on, you're trying to find the initial design partners, right? Figure out who your target customer profile is. You probably don't want to overly invest in ABX work because you don't actually know who your ideal customer profile is. And it all starts with that kind of target list of accounts. If you don't know the right target list of accounts, then you're just really like doing coordinated, unified go-to-market in a way that's wasted effort because it's to the wrong group of people and you kind of need to start from scratch. So make sure you have enough insight into who your, best fit accounts are in the first place. And then the other thing for me is that there are some folks that I work with that are more like prosumer tools, right? Where there's an individual that acts more like a consumer in how they buy. And for those folks, you're not really selling to an account, you're selling to an individual. And so you don't really need the same kind of ABX approach, which I think works better when there are multiple people that you care about with an account, and then that account is valuable enough where you can really, make the most of these tactics.
It's super interesting. I think where we are now and a couple of years ago was all about different buzzword, different acronym that you want to use for how you go to market, but it really comes down to understanding your buyers, how they want to buy, and then tailoring the strategy to that. So it makes a ton of sense. And I would be curious, shifting gears a little bit for the topic on everyone's mind, where do you think AI has a role in this ABX motion versus where maybe it exists, but it's not ready or beneficial yet?
It's fascinating. I think the answer to that question keeps evolving a lot. But if I think about like AI can play a role across the journey, I think it's especially effective as you're thinking about in the earlier parts of the buying journey. You're really looking to reach a large number of people in an efficient manner. And then as you get people that are warm, right, like that they're really ready to buy, that's when that additional level of human touch, that additional creativity, doing things that don't scale, if you can do that in a much more focused way, you can kind of get the magic of why we have people involved in this part of the buying journey. And so I'd say, like, in general, AI is more towards the top and mid funnel. And then there's some techniques kind of more bottom of funnel, but I don't think we're totally there yet on AI. But maybe just to zoom out, this kind of buying journey that's in my head, it actually looks like the buying journey that, you think about like in a marketing 101 class. Like, it's not a rocket science journey, but we now have much better data on who the accounts are that we're trying to reach and who the contacts are and exactly where they are in real time in the journey. So we don't have to go do a consumer survey to kind of guess where people are in the journey and then run that once a year and look back a year later to see where we are. We can know precisely, hey, are the decision makers we care about, are they visiting our website? Are they going through our interactive demo? Are they attending our webinars? Are they attending our events? Are they at our dinners? Are they signing up for a demo request? Like, we can see if we're doing these kind of coordinated go-to-market activities towards the right people in a way that's influencing their journey. And so the journey in my head is like, you've got to first identify those accounts and the people at those accounts that you care about. You then want to get them to be aware of you, at least like somewhat familiar with who you are and what you do. But it's like, if asked, they should know who you are, right? And so those are people that are usually seeing your ads, maybe your LinkedIn ads, or opening your emails consistently. Usually like more than one person at the account is opening multiple emails. They might be landing on your website at that point, but probably more like homepage surface level intent. And then as they get aware, you think about them getting interested, and then later stages of like they're evaluating vendors, they're ultimately making a purchase decision. But it's that in terms of AI, identifying the right people at the right accounts is super valuable because you can look at kind of historical data to say, what are the signals that this account is a good fit? And instead, we used to, to decide on an ICP, we used to look at like industry and company size and maybe geo. Now we can look at things like what other technologies are they using? Are there signals of, is the company growing? Is it not growing? There's so many more kind of fascinating, more granular criteria we can look at, like how many jobs have they posted lately? Do they have a job open of this specific role that like aligns with what our product does? You can really get a super data-driven set of target accounts. So I think that's a fascinating use case for AI. And then you can get the right contacts at those accounts. Now, that's not so much AI, it's just like modern go-to-market tooling, but getting those contacts and then pulling in information about those contacts is super valuable. And then getting folks to be aware and interested in the solution, that's when you start to want to do more and more direct marketing to folks. And if you can do direct marketing in a way that feels personalized, but do it at scale, that can be both cost efficient and effective. And so I think about people are using tools like Clay to kind of have more personalized feeling, automated outbound outreach. They're also using AI SDRs. There's the jury's still out on effectiveness of some of those. There may be, using SDR and BDR teams, but pulling in more account research through AI on those accounts so that it can automate the outreach of the BDRs and SDRs. But generally, the AI is pulling in interesting data about these accounts to help personalize any outreach in a way that's as scalable and efficient as possible. And then it'll be interesting to see how far AI can go. Like I've met with companies that have essentially AI versions of sales reps. And so do you actually offer that up as a first call to both qualify and start to move people through the journey? It'll be fascinating to see how far AI goes. Like, do we ever get to that, 3-person unicorn that Sam Altman envisions? I'm not totally sure yet, but I'm close attention to it.
It's such a great point, and it's exactly what we're thinking about of how do you take all these, intent signals. Previously, you can only get so much information, and that was relevant. And now with AI, there's so much data available to both scrape it, but then make sense of the data to replace the seller. And that's what Focus is working on and shipping and thinking a lot about. But I would be curious, question, if you have any others top of mind.
Yeah. So in terms of like where the accounts are, often people are just gathering accounts through, whether it's like Apollo, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Clay, KeyPlay, like they're identifying accounts. They often start tracking accounts in a combination of their CRM and their marketing automation platform. So they have one view. And so that's often where the reporting lives. And then there's data points that you're sending to those platforms to update the reporting and the scoring. And there's tools like Parabola that can help automate that data flow and account stage changes and help you kind of fine tune the specific parameters you use, moving folks through. But I started to think about like people using tools like Wormly or RB2B or Unify, Focus to look at like de-anonymized website data to identify signals of who's on your account, who's on certain pages as a way of indicating where people are in their journey. You can also use tools like Focus or others around collecting product data events for maybe your self-serve users or free users who are at these accounts that you care about. That's another important data source. But I think it really, to me, starts with having this unified view of the target accounts and what different journey stages mean in your world. And then you can then find the right vendors to pull those sources in.
Amazing. Thank you, Kyle. We have 2 questions in Q&A, so I'm going to try to get through these in our 4 minutes. So we have a question on what's a good strategy for an MQL model? Should these always be measured based on the lead's interactions with the product? And maybe your answers would be MQLs are dead. Or do you have a different answer?
It's a waste of calories to be like, we could basically tighten the box of an MQL so tightly that it like fits into this framework. But ultimately, I think that the time is better spent getting actually aligned across teams between sales and marketing on the right accounts and stop having battles of like, this is marketing generated, and so therefore it's an MQL versus this is sales generated. Like, we want to both be working the same set of people at the same accounts in a way that's efficient and moves people through the journey but also feels coordinated, where we're not just hitting people with different messages across different platforms. And so I'd rather think of it as like, what's a point at which someone is a warm lead? And what are some of the signals that would indicate that? And it usually means they need to be at the right person at the right account, and they need to be taking action that indicates they're interested in kind of your product or your value proposition. And so just hold yourself accountable to like that kind of North Star vision. And to me, that's where like the MQL definition kind of becomes a moot point, because what's actually mattering is that you're moving these accounts to the journey at a faster and faster rate.
And maybe a final question. We talked a lot about how there's different, and this is from Tamara, there's different go-to-market strategies and different ways to get to your buyers. Her question is, it seems like PLG hybrid companies struggle with each team chasing their own set of goals and missing the big picture. Is there a company-wide KPI or a change that you've seen work so that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so I normally think about it as like, well, you see this a lot, right? Where you maybe have a PLG team that cares about self-serve revenue, an enterprise team that cares about sales revenue, and it's not, buyers don't care how they buy necessarily. Buyers just want to make sure your product solves their needs and that it's a fair price and they have their questions answered. So I think of it as like maybe tier your target accounts as like an SMB and commercial or enterprise. Your SMB, it's probably not a group of accounts that you want to spend a lot of sales resources or marketing resources to acquire and then convert. It's probably maybe not worth, for instance, like a BDR team to attract someone that's going to close on a $50 a month deal. And so if you think about like SMB versus commercial enterprise goals, the commercial enterprise goals should be more about revenue, and then the leading indicator to revenue would be pipeline within your target accounts. And if you think that way, it's sort of then what are the things that you need to do to get to ICP pipeline and then revenue, and what's the contribution from marketing and from other teams. That's my preferred way of looking at it. And I think that reduces misalignment, and it ultimately just focuses more on the universe of buyers you care about and opens up the aperture of all the different ways that you can reach and convert those audiences.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyle. We covered a lot from PLG, ABM, AI, all the acronyms, but a lot of really, really good tangible advice. So thank you so much for being here and giving us all your secrets to what's most top of mind and go to market. Before we wrap up, where can people find you?
Certainly find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. For folks that don't know, I'm too active. And then you can check out the newsletter by just going to growthunhinged.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyle.